Welcome to Literati Circle once again. And today I want to talk about something called spill narratives. And spill narratives are content-specific prompts that attempt to look at sense through a orchestrated structure, which may sound a bit chaotic, and that's what makes it attractive. The idea that you have a structure that is forced into a chaotic entity. And so we start with the Higgs boson and the science of distribution, the idea of the origin and the birth, the conception of nature, the explosion in a word, an attempt to perceive an idea that we came from a single particulate. So we crash atoms and such, so to break them apart and to find these particles that articulate our being into its smallest increment. This because we perceive that our understanding of ourselves would be clearer if we would understand that concept of singularity and conception. And so the idea of conceptual birth is true in literature as well. When Derrida speaks about the transcendent arc and its beginnings, its origins, and through its evolution, where and what happens to its significance and its persuasive power, and poetry, which legislates our senses and captures a unique primal look into ourselves, gravitating outwards, is simply part of a collection of many rhetorical predecessing ideas that are subjected within the prose speech as well as the antithetical speech, which may wither, which may rust, which may die, and all of a sudden may explode in its rebirth again. Literary absolutes reign rhetorical terror. We are intrinsically unaware, at times artificially moral and malfeasant to its deceptive and moorish and foolish and blinding cloaked language. We attempt to have an awareness or comprehension of any light reflecting its linguistic beauty in the realm. And so the poet, he does it from the point of which the neoclassicalisms were not ever to be amused by nature's comical subjection of our own reflecting humility. The feudal city, the unimaginable fife cohorts of critic morals, the spear-chuck snapping despotisms, the demonstrative vice pundits of calamity, the entities of authority that speak into what they call a so-called aesthetic truth are simply borrowed and arbitrated designs of what we believe at times is contrary to ourselves, yet we go with it. And after Columbus promised gold and in its glory saw only its dust, he essentially became this horror of panhandling that left an inviting token of myth and metaphor for food for poetry, like Blake, who calibrated celebration through desire and understood the dark and deep circles that fed Europe for thousands of years. to come crashing like ebbs and flows into a new time and beginning. And the concept of the Grecians, the Norman warriors, the idolatries of the past, the William Penns, were simply fairy tales. The myth, its metaphor, the empirical mindfulness, the dusk evenings, the ink-botched pressures of history are anxiously awaiting our pen, our mind, and our sense. To give an idea of what poetry was like in the city, it was an organism. It was a universe in process. It was the mind becoming wholly and complete, as in the likeness of nature, if I may say, in a psychoanalytical way. The mind must flow with this nature, with this absolute, side by side. And if it doesn't, it loses its transformative evolution, of its transformative natural evolution, which therefore cannot transcend in a quite normal and unique way. And so we have attacks, for example, the neoclassical arts that exposed antiquity, and the romantics of Wordsworth and Leigh Hunt and Byron and Coleridge that became reputed critics and cornerstones of a new and attractive poetry. The freshness, the source of man's vision, the spoken conviction without any convention or form. And as Wordsworth believed, the poet is a man-speaking myth. The form to be quiet and direct, the pleasures of necessity, the convenience of clarity and definable lines, and the communication within a metered verse had to be distributively equitable, in so much to attempt to form beauty by a command, to be recollected dutifully, and in true reflection to evoke and add feeling, a wanting of the poet to go beyond the elements of pain, so the reader can enjoy the pleasures. And lastly, the rustic poet, the poetry as a recreation of a lived event in memory, and those living in great events would become more superior than the poets themselves. And thus the poem must come from the poet's experience as independent and resolute to its mindfulness. Thank you for listening to Literary Circle.